Don't hear any footsteps on the stairs.
No. Okay, we're away, are we? Jolly good. Welcome everybody to the Finance and General Purposes Committee meeting for Tuesday the 10th of October. First of all, apologies for absence. No apologies for absence. So we don't have to receive any apologies for absence and we don't have to accept any. No. Moving on to declarations of interests. To receive and consider any declarations of interest from members and officers under Section 50 of the Local Government Act 2000, our Standing Order 35. This requirement applies only in respect of matters which are to be considered by the Council at this meeting. 2501, to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests. No. To declare any other interests.
Sorry. Well, Mr. Mayor, can I just ask about the membership of this before we go any further? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's fine. That's fine.
But wasn't Neville Oates on this as well?
No.
No, he's on personnel, but he's not on finance.
Yeah, we've had a couple of joint personnel and finance meetings.
That's where I'm
But this is now just back to finance.
Okay, I do apologise for the interruption, sir.
That's why I got confused when Councillor Chesser went home, because she came to do something else, but she's not stopping for this because she's not on finance.
Right. So I do say, because on the last one it says Councillor Oates, and I thought, well,
that was a combined,
Yes, combined
finance and personnel.
Yeah, all right, okay. I never know where I am on.
Okay, so no pecuniary interests and no other interests from anybody.
No.
Representations from interested parties, nothing received. And we've got nobody in the room. Consideration of requests from interested parties, nothing to consider. Minutes of the previous meetings of Finance and General Purpose. Proposition to approve and sign the minutes of the Finance and General Purpose and Personnel Committee meeting held on the 12th of September as an accurate record.
I have read it, I'll propose.
Proposed by Councillor Glenn, seconded by Councillor Peel. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Right. To receive account balances for council accounts. We're on financial matters now. We have not got a full set of balances with us tonight. We would have to hope to have some by the next meeting.
all I can say is that we have had the second half of the pre-search.
Yeah, I can see that. It's come in. Can we go and spend it?
It's there.
Try.
Yeah, that came in on the 26th of September.
Right. We've got that, and the clerk has got the bank balances and things if you needed to know those, but if you want to take those as read, we'll move on. 2902, to consider the grant request from Oundle Music Trust. I see we've got a hard copy document here, and we've also got two documents within the pack. Does anybody have any questions on this?
Yes, right.
Councillor Glenn.
They want £1,000, is that correct?
They do.
Yeah.
And this is to support the cinema or just the music trust in general? Because the music trust in general seems to be doing very well to me. And if we've only got £15,000 to spend, 1,000 to people who've got...
We've only got 10,000 to spend.
Sorry, 10,000.
Yes. Yeah.
£1,000 to people who are doing quite well. Their reserves went up by about 8,000 last year, as I read it. You know, as much as I'd like to support that, it's an important event in the town. I think maybe we've got other priorities.
Does anybody else share that view or any other views? Councillor Chappell.
I can understand why that view is taken. On the other hand, this is arguably the most prestigious event that runs in this town. It promotes the town up and down the country, let alone locally. And in a sense, therefore, we're getting quite good value for the money in terms of what we put into it and what we arguably get out of it in terms of the kudos of being associated with it and the acknowledgements we derive from the trust. And the fact of the matter is that it runs a series of events which are much appreciated in the town, and I would certainly be in favour of supporting it in the way that's requested.
Any other comments?
Can I make another comment?
You can, yes.
I understand that, and that was in 2 lines about it, I have to say, for the same reason. That we should be seen as supporting it, but maybe there are other ways of supporting it, advertising or promotion in some other ways, I don't know. It's 10% of our charity budget.
Does anybody else have any other comments?
I can see both sides of the argument actually here. I mean, because obviously they do a lot for Arundel, they bring a lot of interest into Arundel, and they also bring a lot of around the villages. So I understand that perfectly well. But I also understand what Councillor Glenn's saying. Looking at it, they're not exactly poor. And I don't know, maybe we should look at maybe reducing the amount that we give them, but it gives them a good amount so that we show willing to support them, but save a little bit on the balance of what we've got left, because we haven't got a lot, and as Councillor Glenn said, it is 10% of our total budget to date.
Yes.
So all I'm saying is that if everybody agrees, I would vote for the £1,000. But if there could be some compromise, I think that might be a good solution as well, so that everybody gets a little bit, but and don't feel snubbed by us in the way that it would if we didn't give them something. And because of the work in Arundel and the villages, I think it's important.
Would you like to propose an amendment of a lesser amount?
Well, I mean, what I would say is if we propose to give them some money, I think we should give them between £500 and £750. It's not.
Right.
It means that if an emergency does come up where we have to spend another £250 or £500, we've got that solution. But I'm quite happy to go with the £1,000 if that's not acceptable to everybody else.
Do we have a seconder for that amendment?
Sorry, Anthony, before we go to the vote. Whatever we say to them, we've got to make them aware that our budgets are limited, and this isn't because we don't want to support them, or we do want to support them, but they are taking a fair share of our charity budget. Even if we do decide to go ahead with £1,000, they have to really should understand that where they're coming from with our budget. I think next year maybe it won't be a thing. But it's up to you. I'll go along with the flow.
You go along with
Go with the flow, whatever you guys think.
Councillor Chappell.
Can I propose an amendment and propose that we give them the full amount that they've asked for on this occasion? I am conscious of the fact that, as they themselves say, for various reasons, there hasn't been the level of support recently that there could have been from this council. So I think we should give them the full amount.
You're proposing the full amount. If I don't have a seconder to the amendment, then we're back to the proposal that was on the agenda in the first place, which is the full amount. Do I have a seconder for the full amount?
I think, if Councillor Chappell feels strongly about it, and he knows more about this than I do, and I'm not pretending that I know a lot about it.
Yes.
I will second it, but I would then caution that we do send a letter to them saying that this might not be available next year.
Right.
I agree, yeah.
On that basis, you're prepared to second the proposal for the £1,000. Those in favour? That's carried. 2903, to receive the annual return and issues arising from the report.
Oops comes to mind here.
Yes, well, It's something that apparently came from last year's report, where the amount of money was put in under loans and capital. And I spoke to Paul about this because that box, I've always assumed, was just for loans, but he'd had a conversation last year and had been asked to put it in, remove it from the expenditure column and payments column and put it into capital. So this is what he did this year, and they've come back and said no, it should be in the other column. But since I have been trying to, I'm sure I saw an email which had said all of this from last year, but I've tried to find it and I can't.
So I can ask a question. What is box 5 and what is box 6?
If you remember from the annual return,
No, I don't.
box 5 is loans, interest, capital
Okay.
payment, repayments, and it tends to be expenditure. It's a bit misleading because it says total expenditure of payments of capital and interest made during the year on small authority borrowings, which to me means it's loans.
Yes.
And in this particular instance, an amount of money was put in there that is a capital expenditure. But when I spoke to our finance officer, he said that in the previous year he'd been asked to put it into
Right, okay.
column 5. So, but in future it should be in column 6.
Do you know what the amount is that's been wrongly included or wrongly shifted?
They don't mention it on this. I'd have to go back and have a look.
Is it a large amount?
Yeah, no.
No, okay. Thank you.
Seems to me that on the face of it, we're going to have to correct it. I do think that somewhere in our minutes, we should actually record the fact that we were simply following what we'd apparently been advised to do before. And it appears that
Yeah.
the advice previously received may have been incorrect.
Yes.
Perhaps we could try and find a way of clarifying it. Maybe we
Yes.
should ask Danny Moody or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I can go back to BDO. The only thing is that this is obviously their final audit, and then they're moving to new auditors next year.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And,
So we'll see what the new ones
Yeah.
come up with next year.
but I think what I'll do is I'll go back over and find out exactly what was included,
Yeah.
and then speak to our new auditors, or probably the internal auditor that we get,
Yeah.
and just say, what do I do? Do we need to correct it before we do the next year's?
It looks as though we've made a mistake that they've highlighted. That's the
Yeah.
only thing.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not our mistake. We've followed the last instructions from the previous year. And they're now telling us to do what we did last year, and they told us it was wrong.
Yeah,
But I've come across this before with auditors, and some of it is different auditors, different accountants within the firm having different ways of accounting for things. So it might be as simple as that. But that, having made that point, do we agree to receive this report? It will go on our website. It's a document that's available for the public to see. Do I have a proposer to?
it also needs to go to full council as well, because it will be full
Yes.
council who will then approve the annual return.
Yes, in
We
which
need
case
to recommend it.
recommend it to full
To full
council.
council.
Do I have a proposer for that? Councillor Chappell, seconded Councillor Glenn. Those in favour? So we'll discuss it again at full council, where we'll give the same explanation, and I'm sure there's nothing much we can do with
No,
it, really.
when it says at the top, it says the following issues have resulted in the annual return being qualified.
Yes.
I did ask exactly what that meant, and it basically means that if we wanted to go for the local council award, or as it used to be quality status, we wouldn't be able to do that for a year.
Right.
But I'm not sure that we can do that anyway, because I don't think we have 2/3 elected councillors, so,
Right.
but that's the only, being qualified, that's the only.
We are elected, we're elected unopposed, but we
No,
are
but if
elected.
you're not, I don't think you are 2/3 now, because you've got a lot.
Nobody's been co-opted.
We're 10 out of 14.
10 out of 14 have been elected,
Well,
which is over, all right,
Well,
yes,
2/3.
it's over 2/3, isn't
Yeah,
it?
10 out of 15, it was 2/3.
Oh, that's right, you are 10, yeah.
But I don't think we're overly concerned about going for that at the moment.
No.
I think
No,
we've come through other issues and we're still dealing with issues, and perhaps when we've done all of that in a year or so, we might be looking to go for that, and it might then be relevant. But by then, that one should have time expired anyway.
yes, yeah, I think so.
Okay, 2904, to discuss the budget for 2018-19. We've got some papers in front of us. Councillor Glenn and I have made a start going through looking at figures. It's really at this stage, just have a look at what we approved last year, and think what we might need to make provision for this year within the accounts, where we think we need to put specific provision in for specific repairs. I don't know which building we'll move on to at Estates, which building is next to be given the once over, or what other work we intend to do that we need to make provision for in the budgets. We need, I think, to put some more money in next year for neighbourhood plan. We need to think how much we might need, bearing in mind the referendum is looking like it will come into next year, and possibly other things. So we need to be thinking what a referendum will cost us, and possibly other promotion of the plan, if we're allowed to do it at that stage. Does anybody have any comments on the budgets? Does anybody have any suggestions of?
One of the things I haven't sort of read it through properly yet. One of the things I've noticed is that we've actually increased the income from this year to from the proposed income this year, the gross income next year to 2017-2018. I have to tell you, I think with what's coming up, I think we've been rather optimistic.
That's this current year.
That's the current year that we're in, 17-18.
17-18.
It's the current year.
That's the current year.
Was it? Thought we were just-
We finish in
Sorry, my apologies.
18-19.
31st of March 2018 is where the current year finishes.
Yeah.
So 18-19 is the one we've now got to prepare budgets for. We've got to be thinking
Sorry,
ahead.
that's me. I've been reading the long page. Yeah, sorry.
So that's what we prepared last year.
Yeah.
What we've got to do is effectively pencil in the far right hand column some projections for the 2018-19 year. Councillor Chappell.
I mean, we seem to have got two capital projects that are sort of still in their relatively nascent stages. One is the extension to this building,
Yes.
which arguably can't come soon enough.
I do apologise.
The second is the open space maintenance,
Yes.
which again, bearing in mind the impact of the rental of the Eastwood property, again, to my mind, can't come soon enough. So I think it's essential in budget for both of those things. We've talked about the possibility of developing some sort of succession programme for our open space maintenance by taking on somebody. That needs to be factored in. There's an item later on in the agenda that we'll talk about that is a relatively small amount. But the other thing that I would like us to seriously look at is the grants budget.
Yes.
The grants budget.
Okay.
Because of constraints, it's stayed pretty much at around the level it is for a while, having been at one stage a little higher than that. I do feel that providing support to community organisations, whether they're arts organisations or other organisations, is one of the things that we can make a difference at doing. And the support that we give is always very, very sort of gratefully received by those organisations, and I think popular within the town. And I've certainly never ever had any parishioner speak to me and say, oh, you're giving out far too much money in grants and I think you should be cutting back on that part of the budget. So I would like us to look at it. It may well be that by the time we've looked at the impact of all the other things that we A, have to do, and B, might want to do, that what I've just said becomes aspirational and not practical, because I'm equally conscious of the fact that any increase in precept should ideally be kept to around about the rate of inflation, or the predicted rate of inflation at that point.
Yes. We may have, next week, we may have more of an idea. Number one, when unitary authority and any devolution that results from that might happen, and I don't think it's going to happen in the next year. I think it's a few years away, but there may well be a need to make provision and make preparation for us taking on other services. The clerk and I were at the NCALC AGM where the deputy leader of the county council was suggesting some of the services that they might need to shed down to parish level. One of them being local libraries, suggesting parishes take on the library within their parish. Now, I think ours gets a lot of support and is well helped by county, but if that were something that county were thinking of handing down, it's something we in the future might need to think about and making provision towards. We might need to think how we support that, and it might be yet another thing that we become trustees of, to run a library service. There was one item that amused us was the idea that we might have to go out and buy a gritting lorry and be getting the boys out at 1 a.m. to salt the roads. But I think that's going to be a major expenditure. We'll have to wait and see exactly where that one goes with county. But there may be some other stuff that will come down, including it might be that we end up doing a lot more grounds maintenance and general maintenance work on behalf of not only ourselves but surrounding parishes. That might be something that we need to look at and make provision for in the future. So in terms of succession planning, I think that's one where we might need to look at succession planning very seriously. The three of the items that Councillor Chappell mentioned, the two capital projects that we've got, they essentially, we were looking to fund those from Public Works Loan Board loans.
You've got to pay for them there.
Yeah, well, the one for the workshop would be paid for if we set the number of years such that the repayment term of capital plus interest is equal to the rent we currently pay. It will cost us no more than we currently pay. That was what we said last year, and I think that is where we're still thinking And I think that would probably be the best way to handle that. There'd be no financial impact on the council then. And then when it's paid off in however many years it is, we would then find ourselves running, not having to find the loan repayment. We won't be paying rent, and we would be that much better off at the end of the loan period. And we would also have a physical asset, a building, that would be worth considerably more than we paid for it by that stage. So it looks like a win-win situation to do it that way, and we're not talking of a huge amount of capital loan. The other project, we do need to make a provision for the kitchen and changing room area, and we did put a figure in last year to pay for that, and that again would be a small loan paid over the term of years. Again, would be to get it to a reasonable figure so that the annual repayments of capital and interest are well within what we can afford. Those two projects, we're at the point where we soon need to be engaging an architect for the workshop. We're at the point where we need to go to the next stage of planning application for the changing room and kitchen, and from there engaging a builder and get it built. So within this current financial year, weather being kind to us, we might get both of these projects done within the current year if we're lucky. It may be that they will extend into the early part of the following year. With regards to the grants, I think we may need, as you say, they haven't been increased for many years. What we looked at last year was if we, through marketing, can help some of these people who apply for loans, and I don't think the Music Trust is necessarily an example of that. They probably do need our assistance through a grant, but some of them we could actually, through marketing, we could help them to help themselves, and in that way avoid them coming to us for a grant. Councillor Peel.
Well, you mentioned two or three things there, and I'd
Yep.
like to go through them
Yep.
first. Start with the grants.
Yes.
I actually think Councillor Chapman's dead right. We need to put more money aside for the grants next year because, and I'm not a doomsday man, I believe in the cup being half full rather than half empty, but I really do believe that in the next 12 to 18 months we're going to suffer some very severe shocks, and those grants might be needed to support local people in this area.
Yes.
So some of those grants are really important. In regard to the workshop, you know my situation with the workshop. I'm quite happy to see it being built at the Rugby Club for obvious reasons. I don't agree with you that there's going to be a vast amount of valuation increase on that, simply because we're going into a long lease with the Rugby Club. So if in 20 years' time we say, oh, well, we want to sell this, well, we're going to have a restricted area where we can sell it, because the Rugby Club almost have first call on it, so that the valuation of that is not going to go up so much. I agree that we've got to do the changing rooms and the extension to the hub here. I'm still not convinced the hub is worth doing, but without that extension, we're not going to see it either way. So I agree with that, and I really think that inflation, which is what, is 3.2 now, is it? 3.2. The actual, I'm not talking about the headline. I'm talking about the actual rate of inflation. Yeah. If we look at the top measure, we're looking at 3.2. I would agree with you entirely. We've got to look at least a 3.2 increase in the preset, probably slightly higher, because I think that in the next 12 to 18 months we might see not a big decrease, but a decrease in the amount of money coming into the the hub and the higher rooms. And I think we've got to safeguard against that. I think we've got to look at having that money available just in case. I know, hopefully, it won't be needed, and possibly the following year we'll actually reduce the amount of precept we require, but I think the next 12 to 18 months are going to be quite severe, and I mean, one of the things that I've been doing over the last week and a half in my company is actually looking at possibly taking a decrease in the amount of business we've been doing, and we've been growing at 25% every year for the last 10 years, and we're looking at maybe a 15% decrease in the next 12 to 18 months. So there is that uncertainty all over now, and I think as a council you'd be silly not to look at the downside of what's happening. And it is going to be a little bit of a shock to people. So I think we've got to protect ourselves where we can and get, I know it sounds like money grabbing, but I think we've got to look at getting a better deal this year so that we can hopefully help people throughout the next 12 to 18 months.
Certainly, I think we've got to inflation-proof our budgets. I think we've certainly got to inflation-proof them. And of course, we don't know, it wasn't mentioned at this year's NCALC AGM. Last year, the big thing was precept capping. There was very little mention of it this year. And in fact, the suggestion was that they would turn a blind eye to capping us for a year or two, because if devolved powers come down, they can't squeeze everywhere. If they're squeezing county and district, and if they become a unitary authority, they'll squeeze them as well. If they are not going to release the squeeze on them, then you can't squeeze the toothpaste tube at all points. Somewhere there has to be room for the services to be provided, and that might be us. Councillor Chappell, did you want to come in on that?
Well, it's not so much on that point, but just a further sort of point that the Section 106 money that we have, are we able to use that money for the Fletton House extension?
No.
I can't remember the exact terms of it.
We've got, there's 132,000
Yeah.
that's earmarked for cycle paths.
It's just after that,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And that has been, because it's part of the neighbourhood plan, that is actually due to be spent soon, but it will be kept over because it is committed funds. There's another small amount, about 10,000, that we have got that we can spend over the next 10 years towards maintenance. So we can use that for ground maintenance, not necessarily buying equipment, but if we need to replace play equipment and that sort of thing. There's some money coming in for Herne Road, Ashton Road, and I've put this on the full council agenda for next week. That's the money that we've been told, I think it's about 46,500
Yes.
we can spend on replacing the boardwalk at Snipe Meadow.
Yes.
And then there's a further amount of about 70,000 that is to be spent on adult and youth outdoor activities, so quite specific. And one of the things that we could do is we could replace, say, the skate park with that. But that is, when it talks about outdoor recreational activities for adults and youth, that's it, that's all you can spend it on. So there isn't anything that can be spent
Yeah.
on the extension.
No, right.
Good try.
Given the amounts that are there, I'm just wondering about particularly the youth football, whether or not there's any land that we could acquire that might be suitable for their purposes. In the same way as we provide facilities for rugby and for tennis and bowls and what have you, it would be quite nice if we could do that. Bearing in mind what might follow in due course around the cricket club, depending on exactly what happens on some parts of the neighbourhood plan and what may flow from it. But that would be the one area of sports provision that this council wouldn't then be directly involved in unless we make something happen. And so it might be worth estates maybe looking at whether it's even feasible. Well, first of all, would the clubs be interested, which I suspect they would, because it might make them less vulnerable. And secondly, would it actually be feasible in terms of is there land that we could potentially acquire at a cost we could afford from those sort of monies?
Sorry.
Councillor Glenn's been waiting patiently.
That's all right.
Go.
No, I agree with everything you've been saying, Councillor Chapman. I just want to make a point that you were saying that inflation is 3.2% and we should get that and more. But it also, we don't know what inflation's going to be.
No, that's what I'm saying.
And it's not only us that's suffering from inflation, but also our ratepayers as well, and they're being squeezed at all ends at the moment. So it's a big ask for them to expect to come up with, say, 5% or whatever, I think, to cover us.
I just think that obviously if we go in too low, I think we're going to struggle.
I think we have to be very careful in our budget planning and maybe have some contingency plans on our sleeves.
But as I say, that's why I think if we go. I'm saying the right figure to 3.2. I wasn't saying 5%, but something slightly more than 3.2 to make sure that we've got enough. But I mean, I agree with you entirely. We can't go too high because obviously a lot of people will suffer that way as well. You know, it's a sort of two-edged sword, isn't it? You know, you've got to have enough there for what we might need. So that's why I thought 3.2 maybe slightly more. But I don't think 5% is. I think 5% is too much. I'm just saying we should go for the top rate of inflation rather than the bottom rate of inflation. Right. So I think 3.2. Going back to what Councillor Chapman said about the youth football, one of the things that, and going back to the fact we've got funds for adult and youth facilities.
Yes.
What a good idea it would be is if we could get some hard-standing football area for walking football for the older person over 55. Also, that could be used for five-a-side football for youths and slightly older people. And also, at the same time, because it would be big enough, you could actually do a basketball. You'd actually have 3 or 4 sports in one area, which would be a multi-sport situation. Wouldn't take up as much ground as a full-size football pitch. You'd still have to have a small changing room somewhere or whatever, because obviously that you have to have it nowadays. But that might be another way of producing, you know, because there are a lot of older people here now. There's 4 of us on the table. So, and I include myself in that. Who could actually probably do quite well at walking football. We could have a walking football outdoor council team.
I might even
Anyway,
volunteer
sorry.
for that.
That's a bit of light entertainment.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting thought. That might be something that we should provide for the town. The 3.2%, we're running at 395,000, I think, for precept this year. If you're looking at putting 3.2% on that, you're heading somewhere around about 12,000 extra on the precept. To then spread across the various budget areas. I don't know how much Councillor Chappell is thinking of increasing grants by. They're currently at 10,000. I do think maybe we've got to, within grants, if we up it, ring fence 1 or 2 of them that are the sort of annual requesters who are very dependent upon our support. And I'm thinking there of people like Chat. We meet one of their major expenditures each year. It might be that we ring fence items like that in our budget as specific items, and then we still have a general pool of £10,000. That might be a way to increase it.
Actually, I actually thought we'd already sort of said that we'd ring-fence people like chat and things. Is that not
We
correct?
talked about chat. We've got to bring that one up again at estates and again at a full council meeting, but not the full council next week.
Right, no,
I need to get some more information because the clerk and I have had a conversation about this today, and we've been talking about we need to look into how the council is the terms of our VAT registration. I believe there is a way that councils can, in certain circumstances, be allowed to waive VAT charged on certain items. Obviously not on commercial stuff, but on non-commercial stuff like charities and amenities. I believe there is a way of doing it. I remember wording in a lease I had with a local authority a few years back, where the wording suggested that they had the right to not charge VAT or charge it, and on that particular occasion they had decided they would charge VAT, but they had the right under the scheme they were registered under that they could, in certain circumstances, not add VAT in order to keep rents down on certain types of properties.
You can, I mean, that is correct, because, I mean, for instance, I pay VAT on my rent, you pay VAT on my rent. That's the option of the landlord. The landlord doesn't have to actually charge you VAT. You don't. It's his decision to charge VAT, not the government's. He can or can't, whether he wants to or not. He has that right.
So as landlord for our tenants in Courthouse, Fletton House, Jones Strong Centre, the sports clubs down Occupation Road and various other people, we could, no doubt, if we look into this, it might be that that's something we as landlords can undertake to do and save them the amount of VAT. I attended the annual meeting for Volunteer Action a few weeks ago and noted on there what they got down as rent from us, and noticed that the figure, I didn't recognise the figure at first, then realised it was the figure we're familiar with, plus 20% VAT. When I looked at what the 20% VAT was, it was something like £900. Now there's a charitable organisation doing an excellent job, struggling for funds, made a small loss this year on their activities, and would have made, I think they lost 1,900. Well, that loss would have been halved if we hadn't been forced to charge them VAT on their rent for the 2 rooms they rent from us in Fletton House. That can make a huge difference, and it makes a difference based on Chat's current rent. It makes a difference of £200 to them, and it also makes a huge difference to the Museum Trust as well. Their VAT on their rent is a substantial sum of money. We don't get anything out of that, because if we charge VAT, we pass it on straight away to Customs and Excise. So we don't make that money. We're just collecting on behalf of the government. It might be that we help everybody all the way around by looking at our VAT registration rules. So I think that's one area we must look at, and then we must, I think, formulate a policy of what we do, A, with commercial concerns that we deal with, like the start-up businesses who are profit-making, and with a lot of the other activities that go on in, for example, in Fletton House. And then we look also at our policy on charities and what I've called amenities, things like the Scouts and Guides are not strictly charities, I don't think, but they are an amenity to the community. We don't want to be charging them more than we really have to. So I think that we need to establish a policy in estates, take that to full council. Councillor Chappell.
I think we are getting slightly ahead of ourselves, in as much as I'm not at all convinced that we'll get the answer that we hope we're going to get in terms of this VAT situation. If, on examination, it appears that it is indeed possible, then I entirely agree we should develop these sort of policies, and I can see just the sort of organisations that we might want to benefit. However, I would sound a note of caution, because I don't really want word getting back to the charities that they start thinking, oh, there's a good chance we may not have to pay VAT, and then it transpires there's absolutely nothing we can do. So we're right to look at it, but I wouldn't want anybody getting their hopes up, because I'm not at all convinced it's going to be as straightforward as you make it sound as if it might be.
I have an expertise in this. I mean, if we don't charge VAT on rent, can we claim all our expenses input VAT back?
That we'd have to look into.
So all these questions need to be looked into by somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yes, it would. It would have to be looked at very carefully.
The other thing that comes across is that being a landlord, you can't opt in to have VAT charged on some leases and dues, and then not on others. I think you have to do the whole lot, one way or the other.
That's possible.
Is it whether the whatever building it is it whether that is VAT registered, as to whether you charge VAT if somebody's leasing it off you and you claim any VAT on your expenses?
Well, I can only speak for what I know about the law, is that my landlord is VAT registered. Now, he's not VAT registered because he rents the properties to us. He's actually VAT registered because he has another bit of business, and therefore he charges VAT because he can, but he actually doesn't have to. He doesn't have to charge VAT. I was in premises before, in, I think, was it Barnwell Works? I can't remember now anyway. But there was no VAT on that rent, because they didn't opt to go into the VAT.
That's why I thought it was something to do with building. Because I know at Brixworth, when they had a new changing room, they decided to have it VAT registered. So everybody who hired that paid VAT. And obviously anything that we paid, we claimed the expenses back. But then we got other buildings that weren't VAT registered, and there was no VAT on any of the room hire.
Can I suggest that we move on from this and we just get an expert to answer the question?
I agree.
Yeah, you don't like Mark, sorry. So what are we doing about the 3.2%?
Oh, doing about?
Are we going to increase the preset by 3.2%?
Well, we don't have to decide that tonight. I think what we've got to do is look at what we need, what we want to spend in this current year.
Okay.
And then and look at what income we project for next year, and from those two figures have a look at what the difference is, and then that will tell us by how much we need to increase precept. Okay. But hopefully we don't want to be far out of that kind of percentage.
In my experience, by the time you finished your first draft, which usually includes a wish list, you discover that the increase in your precept is in double figures.
Yeah.
Almost every year I've been sitting on this council for the best part of 30 years, that has been where we've ended up. And it's been a question of them looking at things and thinking, what in this list of things that we wanted to do are we going to have to not do? And I suspect it'll be exactly the same this year.
Sorry, can I ask one? I'm sorry, I'm being a nuisance here, but we need, if we want a wish list from councillors, we'll ask them, won't we?
Our standing orders
You've come up with quite a few good ideas. I'm sure there are other ideas.
I think our standing orders require committees, in fact. Theoretically, they should have already been saying, which is one of the reasons why there's an item on this agenda.
We've asked, some months ago, we asked all heads of all committees to come back to us with their income and expenditure projections but I don't think we've had any, have we? We've had nothing from anybody.
Yeah. I mean, it's estates that usually, of course, is the
Yeah.
potentially the big spender, but
Yeah.
Well, the heads of our estates committee is headless. It's me now. By default.
But I mean, going on to expenditure as well, I think one of the things that I would like to see more of is far more signs and flashing lights to slow all traffic down in London.
I have put that on the full council agenda that you asked for.
We've got to sort that out. I mean, it is fine. You know, whether you're a young person or an old person, there are some roads that at certain times during the day you just can't cross, and it is really quite frightening. I know it seems like fun, it's nice and slow.
I don't think the parish council there thinks that that's actually quite the case. It's a perennial issue in the village, speeding through the village.
Yeah.
And indeed they're talking about, well, they've already got one of those sort of signs.
Actually, you see, I mean, I see that and I slow down. Well, I slow down before that because I follow the speed limit because I've done once for speeding, and I don't particularly want to do a speed awareness course again. It's the most boring thing I've ever find. I'd rather take the 3 points, but I slow down at all 30 mile and 20 mile an hour speed limits because it's the only safe thing to do. Anyway, so
Well done.
It's a debate we can have next week,
Yes.
36 mile an hour.
because I've been asked by Parishioners to raise the issue
go on the speed awareness
as well.
Not been on one.
We,
Oh, we've got one.
This again,
do we have any other points on the budget, other than to say to everybody, we need at this stage to be hearing from all councillors items that need to be included in the budget?
Are we, sorry,
Carry on.
Mr. Chairman, are we in that case then going to send a list in and maybe if there's 3 or 4 or 5 reoccurring on everybody's list, they get put to the full council rather than have, 10 councillors with 10 wish lists, all different, but if we can sort of narrow it down to a group that actually is involved in
Well, it will be Councillor Glenn and myself that are trying to, in the first instance, look at the budget. We'll be bringing that to finance meetings, but either in December or at the very latest January, we've got to be able to tell East Northants what our budgets are going to be. The main figure they need to know is what precept we want, because they need by March to be sending that precept figure out with rate demands for the following year. So we've got by December and January, we're in October now, and we're just saying we've made a start on looking at figures. We'll make projections of increasing what we think will be increases in employers' national insurance, and increases in those kind of costs that we have every year, what we think power might increase by. We'll try and make some kind of projections of those, but what we will need is to know any other items that are going on this budget, so that in November and December meetings we can get that down to, at the very latest January, we can actually present our budgets to ENC. Councillor Chapel.
Just to pick up on Councillor Peel's point, what we don't necessarily want is the 10 councillors coming forward with a shopping list that is uncosted, because that's the difficulty. If somebody comes and says we should be doing X, but we have absolutely no idea what it's going to cost, there isn't going to be much time now to find out the costs, to factor them into the budget drafting process, which is in essence already about to start. So,
well, they need to come to us with the cost.
It's getting quite late.
No, they need to be coming to us with the cost. It's
Exactly.
no good coming with, I'd like to build a new whatever. They need to be coming with a figure for that.
And I suspect the difficulty now is that you're probably not going to get very much of that.
Now, in which case it probably won't happen next
This year.
year.
Yeah.
I would like 2.5 million for a planetarium.
Right.
Not for the town, not for business.
You can do the presentation at the town meeting to justify it. And I suggest you bring a tin hat.
How big?
With that, I'm going to move off of
Can I
budgets.
just raise one last thing on the issue of budget? It was only this, just to bear in mind. We need to retain around about 3 months operating expenditure as a reserve.
Yes,
And of course, as our operating expenditure goes up,
yes, the reserve gets
the
bigger.
reserve figure should be going up.
Yes,
And we must actually ensure that
Recovering.
in budgeting, we actually budget to make sure that reserve figure does go up. It's not
Yes.
very sexy, of course, to say, actually, X% of this increase is actually just going straight into a reserve.
Yes.
But you probably have to do it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
And on that subject, I agree, perhaps we should move off budgets because we could spend hours.
One other thing on the budget, are we voting on the increase in grants? Because that was proposed.
Well, I think, I've merely asked, because I know that the Mayor and Head of Finance are looking at these things. I invite them to consider building it in, but I'm kind of putting it on notice that if it isn't in there, I shall probably raise it as an issue
yes.
in due course.
I think either it's got to be a proposition from us to put it into budgets as a figure. We need a figure in mind. I think either next month, the November finance meeting, or the December one. Either of those, we must come up with that figure of what we're going to do with grants, and
I'll have a proposition on that figure for you.
right. With that, we'll move on from budgets and we'll move to 2905 to consider purchasing software to produce planning presentations.
Yeah, it's something I've raised. Councillors may be aware, those who sit on planning or visit planning meetings, that Councillor Oakes, in his own time and using his own equipment, produces visual presentations of each application, which are then shown on the screen over there. And it's an invaluable aid to the committee, and indeed when members of the public are here, it is easy for them to follow what we're talking about and so on. The difficulty, in essence, is it is done by Councillor Oakes. If he isn't around for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. And in fact, it didn't happen this last week for various reasons. And of course, the best will in the world, he's not necessarily going to be here forever and a day.
No.
And it may well be that it's a function that needs to be done in the office. The problem, as I understand it, is that what we have available in the office is probably certainly not capable of producing what is currently produced by Councillor Oakes, and also I think probably needs an extremely reliable laptop system, which hasn't always been the case. Now, laptops these days are not desperately expensive. I am not too sure of the amount or in terms of cost of the equipment, and I'd had hoped to speak to Councillor Oakes, but I haven't managed to do so. But if I can find out from him what he thinks we might need in the office, my view is that by way of forward planning for a time when he's not here to do it, we should get it, coupled to which it will then enable Lisa or whoever to start getting familiar with that. Because in these days, if you do not have paper plans and all the specifications in front of you, you then become extremely reliant upon people having checked the planning applications before the meeting. The risk is, even if they have, by the time they get to the meeting, some of the details lost. Or people are there with tablets or what have you, trying to access ENC's site on the night, but it's not always as straightforward as it might be. And for a relatively modest investment, I think we could ensure that we have sort of continuity and some sort of proper presentation. But it will require us a certain amount in the budget. Equally, I don't think we're looking at even as much as £1,000. I mean, I think we're looking at a relatively modest sum compared to the actual budget. And it's the only sum of money that planning have asked for in as many years as I can remember.
Yeah. We may have a laptop, that would run it. We have a laptop in there, which I think we're finished with at the moment. So it might be that we've got a machine. I know that Councillor Oakes uses 2 or 3 different software packages and moves the information from one to another. He cuts and pastes from one to another. So there are a few software packages the way that he does it. I think the clerk and Lisa have been looking at 1 or 2 other methods, how we might give you essentially the same information by a different method.
Yes. It's the end result I'm interested in, not how we get there. Certainly not
And
being
it probably
technical.
wouldn't be like the presentation that Councillor Oakes does, because I think he cuts, pastes, proposed and existing, puts them all on the screen and highlights areas where the extension may be or where the roof's going to be different. That it may be that we can do something where we can lift the PDFs from ENC website and then and put them in a document that we can then open up as a presentation.
Can I also mention something? Yeah, I don't think we should be dependent on anyone, councillor. So
No.
it should definitely be done in-house, I think, or be capable of being doing in-house. I don't know how much information you've got, how easy you're going to get information out of Councillor Oakes, to be frank. And I don't know if his systems are the best systems, and it may be pertinent if you could draw up a spec and ask Blue Moon what they recommend.
Well, that's another option, yeah.
And also, you may need some training too,
Yes.
of at least 2 staff.
Yeah.
So we can reach out.
Well, if we're going to try and do anything other than what I've just said, I'm sure we will. But yeah, I can certainly do that and look into it.
We want it better than ever before.
3D modelling.
What, do it in music?
Aerial views.
So,
Latest blockbuster.
Sorry?
The latest blockbuster.
Of course.
Planning in Oundle. Featuring.
yes.
Directed by Steve
You're
Spielberg.
But I think that's as far as we can go with
Yes.
that item tonight. I think we need to hand this one to the clerk to talk to Blue Moon, talk to Councillor Oakes about what he uses and how he does it. He has demonstrated to councillors before, because I've been there when he's done it. He has offered to train staff, so it's possible that he would come in and do that if we had the equipment that he uses. But I think we need to leave it with the clerk now to come up with some solutions and put them to us at the next finance meeting.
More than happy to do that. If the clerk wants to chat it through with me at any point.
Yes,
I'm
that's
quite happy
fine.
to.
Right, then the last item under financial matters, 2906, to approve the purchase of a marketing list for corporate companies to send the room hire brochures to. In other words, we've now got the brochures designed, we're having them printed, a small amount printed in hard copy for people who want to collect them or want them by post. But what we want to do, the way to get customers these days, is to use one of these marketing lists. You can get them ready-made, or there is some software, I was telling the clerk about it last Friday, for a small amount of money, when you can produce your own marketing lists. Basically, we need to be looking at corporate companies within, say, a 20-mile radius of Oundle who might be interested in using our facilities for their corporate purposes, either as a boardroom, as meeting rooms, as if they're having a sales team building exercise. If they're doing any kind of team building or stuff like that, they can use our facilities. We need to get those details of what we can offer out to them by email, And there are people out there who specialise in these lists. You can get anything from a few hundred to a few thousand names, and they start from a couple of £100 for a list. So what we need to be doing next is to talk to one or two of these firms and to get a list from one of these firms and start sending emailing our brochures off to them to see if we can attract the kind of numbers of customers we need.
If you do it for a radius of 20 miles, that is going to be a heck of a lot. Because
Yeah.
It's Peterborough, it's Kettering, it's Corby.
But we only want a small number, so we won't. I mean, we'll only circulate to until we've got the number we want. But your success rate on that kind of marketing, whatever it is you're doing, 1% is fairly typical. If you're getting up to sort of 2% success rate on marketing like that, email marketing, it's very, very good. So just remember that only 1 or 2% of those that you send it out to will be interested at this time. It's not to say they won't be interested next year, but this year they may have already had their sales team building exercise, but they may want it next year. So you will find that you will only get a small percentage who will immediately come back and say, I'm interested, give me the prices.
So at the moment we have to do the research to see what they cost, don't we? Before we can't approve the expenditure, we don't know how much it is. So, the principle,
Well, we could
there's no
agree.
point having the brochures and all the work done unless we do this.
I suppose we could set a capped budget.
Well, if we set a cap of £500,
Which is within this committee's expenditure limit.
yes, well within it. So, and see what we could get. I know one or two of these firms. I haven't used them for this particular purpose, but I have used them for email marketing. And there is one good one in Peterborough, and they would be worth contacting and see what sort of a list they can come up with. And it's worth, I think, getting a small list from them and see how successful it is before buying a bigger list. We only want, in terms of corporate bookings, we want one per week for Barnwell, Glapthorne and this room in this building per week on average across the year to pay for all the room costs that we have for Fletton for those rooms. They would pay for themselves if we had one corporate booking per week in each of those rooms. And I think we need one corporate booking in Queen Victoria Hall per week to pay for that, based on what our corporate rates are and what our expenditure is. So that's the sort of numbers we're after. It's not as if we're running this as a commercial venture and we've got to fill this building all day, every day. Councillor Peel.
I'm going to put a bit of a damp squid on it, because any emails I get like that go into my trash can and I never even open them up. And I think 99% of the companies nowadays do that. They don't open them up. I would have thought that if you're going to do a list, you should do a list from the local information you've got, like Angle Info, Thrapston Info, all those things, and then send a letter with Angle Council on the front, because that will be opened up and people will read the contents. And I think you probably get a better hit ratio on that than you would sending out emails to 5,000 companies in the area that would probably just end up in the trash can and never be read.
Sorry, if you had an email from Oundle Council, I think you would read it, wouldn't you?
Only because I'm on the council.
Really?
I just look at it this way. I think, you know, I would open an envelope with Oundle Council and read it rather than open an email from Oundle but they're going to be my trash can.
There's expense sending the well, the expense of sending out the station,
Yeah, I
expense of
appreciate
stamps,
that.
and you've got to have a brochure inside it.
Yeah,
It's
but
going
what
to
I'm
be very
saying is,
expensive.
if you, what I'm saying is that.
And your
I
hit
would
rate
say-
is still 1%.
No, I'd say it would be higher, because people will actually read that.
Well, it would be higher, but so it's expenses.
Yeah, I know the expenses.
More people might read it, but they won't want it. That's the thing. The problem is a large percentage of those you send it to don't want it right now.
No,
And you don't know which ones do and you don't want...
And I mean, I know exactly what Councillor Peel means.
Yeah.
I have, my system seems to have this thing called a clutter box,
Mm.
which I will go through. And in fact, because of the amount that arrives, I probably go through it about 3 times a day. Virtually all of it gets deleted. But if I think, actually, I might at some stage, I'll keep it in there and may be able to go back to it. Now, whether I would remember in 3 months' time, oh yes, I had one, I wonder where it is, I wonder who it was from. But I think the trouble with the brochures going out in the post, although personally I think that it's more likely to be effective than an email, it's a jolly expensive way of doing it.
I agree.
And that's
It's
the
not-
difficulty.
It's not cheap, and I totally agree.
There's
with
nothing to
you.
stop us doing both, but I mean, it is a known fact that one of the most successful ways of marketing at the moment is email marketing. It's
I
one
think
of
we
the-
should give it a try.
one of the most successful methods of marketing.
Okay, well, look, all I'm saying is, I know what I would prefer. As a businessman, I prefer to have a letter that I open up and read, and if I'm interested in it, I keep that thing. Like you, I get lots and lots of trash, and I just delete the whole lot. Normally, I don't even bother to read them.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of companies though that are trying to be paperless.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they have everything electronically and wouldn't wouldn't be having stuff coming through the post. So they're quite used to reading everything on their email.
There's a special little girl that reads it all, or a little boy. And he says, yeah, no, okay. No, if you want to go down that route, I have no objections, and I will vote for it.
Okay.
What does that mean we need to put in a figure? Because you mentioned a figure of £500, it's a very modest initial investment.
Yes.
We could at least see what we could get for that. I mean, if it transpires that we don't think that we can get enough for it, we can always bring it back and have another think.
Yeah, we have a
I'd
look
be
at
quite happy
some of
to
the
go for
technique.
£500 and just see what comes in it.
So are you proposing it?
I'll propose five.
I'll second.
Set a budget of £500, up to £500 for this.
Those in favour? That's carried.
Can I ask another question based on the same thing? Do they then say to you, oh, do you want that amount for Peterborough, or Corby, or Kettering, or is it a general area?
You set them a spec of what you want.
Right.
If you tell them you want firms in Corby, they'll give you firms in Corby. If you tell them you only want manufacturing companies, you only want companies with more than 100 employees, you want companies with a turnover in excess of £500,000 or whatever, you set the parameters, they will build a list accordingly. The more criteria you set, obviously the harder it is for them to find you a list in your local area.
Make sure you're not on the list, we don't waste any time.
Yes, we won't send them to you.
Don't have any carpet manufacturers in Northampton.
Any on there called handle carpet weavers, please don't include them, as it will be one that we'll be wasting our time sending an email to. And the girls will be asked in the office to weed out that one if they find it under the
Fair
front.
enough. I most appreciate that. But going back to the events, have we decided whether we're going to be able to do anything on New Year's Eve in places like that? Because I know that's what we're going off.
What are we talking about now?
Well, we were talking about hiring the rooms and things, and I mentioned that I'm quite happy to hire a room for New Year's Eve.
I don't think we'll have any staff.
Right, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you. So I'm back to the top.
Okay. Any more on the marketing list? No? Everybody happy?
That's fine.
Let's move on. Please note that in view of the special and or confidential nature of the business about to be transacted, it is advisable in the public interest that the public be temporarily excluded and they are instructed to withdraw. That's our Standing Order 3C.
Seconded.
That's been proposed, seconded. Those in favour? All in favour. And we move on to point 1730, which is any other business for report only. We've got nothing on the agenda. Going around the room, Councillor Peel.
No?
Councillor Glenn?
No.
Councillor Chappell? Myself, no. With that, I close the meeting. I can't see the clock because of the light on it.
I've got 1912.
1912 I've got.
19,
912, sorry, yes.
21.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, we finished.
You know, like say, Emma, you